Welcome to the Trainer Podcast. My name's David Fleming, and in this episode, we geek out over some of GM's current performance cars with some unabashed car nerds. John Belk, Brian Goldberg, and Ian Gibson all sit down with me for a discussion about Chevrolet's Camaro and Corvette, as well as Cadillac's ATS-V and CTS-V. So if you've listened to our podcast in the past, previous episodes have been very structured, but this one was much more free-flowing and natural. We had planned on recording for half an hour, but when all was said and done, an hour had passed and we still had plenty more to talk about, and we were really enjoying ourselves. Basically, if you're a car guy or girl and you love talking shop, you're going to love this episode. A special thanks goes out to John Belk, Brian B-Dog Goldberg, and Ian Gibson for taking the time to record this with me. Thanks, guys, and I hope you enjoy. First off, let's start it off with just introductions. Who you are, where you're from, your territory, and those round robin.
John Belk, Cadillac trainer, North Carolina and Virginia.
Brian Goldberg, Cadillac product trainer, Midwest, that meaning St. Louis, Kansas City, Omaha, Wichita.
Those are the two trainers that we have with us that'll be arguing for the Cadillac side, and I'll also be talking on behalf of Cadillac. And my name's David Fleming. I'm the Cadillac trainer out of North Carolina. So arguing the Chevrolet side.
Ian Gibson, Chevrolet trainer from South Central Region, Louisiana territory.
Let's start off by talking about ATS-V and Camaro because they're on the same chassis. We kind of already started there. So. Right. They share the same underpinnings, and talking to a lot of the trainers, there's a lot of this over which car is better, and then of course I know on the Cadillac side we get a lot of talk of why isn't the LT1 in the ATS-V. We know it can fit under the hood, right? Of course, ESS has that. So let's talk a little bit about comparing those two and maybe pros and cons for each one as you pit them against each other.
Well, to get started, to be a bit more specific, I think we need to focus in on ATS coupe versus sedan because there is a huge driving dynamic difference between those two cars.
Yes. It's
a wider stance, it's a lower profile, a lower center of gravity. The ATS coupe is so much a different driving car than just sedan. Sedan's not bad, but the coupe is much different, and I think that's much closer to what the Camaro is.
Basically, in our discussion, we'll put ATS-V coupe against an SS. Let's see. Obviously, the first thing that I want to talk about is the difference in the engine. On the V side, we're going smaller displacement, forced induction, whereas Chevrolet's side, naturally aspirated, push rod. So completely different approaches that kind of get you to the same end result. But what are the pros and cons? So Cadillac, what do you think some of the benefits are to going with forced induction rather than shoehorning the LT1 into the ATS-V?
Well, I think we saw a lot with the SCCA challenge we've driven over the last couple of years where we had the bigger block V8s, but we were being out-cornered and out-accelerated by some of the smaller Porsches that we were running against. So going with that lighter platform, that more nimble handling that it brings out, gives us some advantages in cornering, especially on the road tracks or the tighter courses that a lot of these Europeans like to drive on.
Yeah, taking the weight out of the nose of the vehicle, always a good thing when you are going for out-and-out handling. Having that, I think, a little bit more sophisticated, particularly for somebody who's looking for that kind of a vehicle. They're not putting pushrod V8s in M3s and M4s. They're not putting pushrod V8s in Audi S4s. Not that, if they wanted to, I suppose they could, even though they don't build anything like that. But we do. And we're going for a little bit more high-tech kind of a thing.
All right. So I'll help you. I'll help you on the Chevrolet side.
All right. So going lighter as far as engine and definitely freeing up a lot of that weight in the front end is definitely going to help with handling. But the one thing that is a concern for me, especially from a customer standpoint, somebody who doesn't have a professional race team sitting there stripping down their motor every weekend, is the smaller displacements are running higher RPMs. They're running more internal pressures. They've been putting a lot more stress on the actual motor itself, where the old traditional classic pushrod V8, it's tried, it's tested, it's true, and it's a lot more durable, especially dealing with high speeds at a pretty constant rate. So from a customer standpoint, I would feel a lot more comfortable from a longevity standpoint. I don't want to have my car in the shop every weekend because I had too much fun on Saturday out at the track.
And I will freely admit that the ATS-VR race team this year has had some issues, which you mentioned right there.
Right.
Some of those same issues.
One point that you brought up, we talk about pushrod V8s in the Camaro, and a lot of people think of that as archaic technology, and it's really not.
Really
right.
Because
I would agree with that.
updates that
Right,
were made
right.
to it, and
Yeah.
I know fuel economy is not it's not even a buying
Buying motive,
motivator in that segment, but you've taken measures to add active fuel management, spark ignition, direct injection to the LT1. So it's right there in terms of efficiency, but still getting the power without putting so much stress on the engine itself. So good point.
And in its defense, the ATS-V, race cars notwithstanding, do have much stronger internal parts than a regular 3.6 liter V6, even different from what's in the CTS-V Sport, which is the twin turbo 3.6 as well. Whole different engine with the titanium connecting rods, correct me if I'm wrong, and the lighter valves and the different turbochargers, the titanium aluminide turbos. Those are not used on the more pedestrian, if you will, CTS-V Sport.
Yeah.
So those things add some power, but they also add some durability and take a little bit of stress off the engine. But yeah, when you've got two turbochargers, forcing air back into the engine, you've got to beef it up properly. And I think that we've done that.
One thing I heard, and this was while Paul and I were out in Pahrump, and this is something that I think the 3.6 twin turbo does have over the LT1, is with forced induction. I think, what is the ATS-V running boost pressure? I think it's like 18 PSI, something like that.
That sounds about right.
I think a peak is about 18, yeah.
So peak, but that's not a set limit. It can actually vary based on air density. So if you find yourself at hotter destinations, say it's Abu Dhabi, I can't speak, and it's over 100 degrees, the air's not very dense. It can actually go above and beyond that 18 psi to counteract the low air density outside. Whereas with a naturally aspirated engine, you're kind of hung out to dry at that point.
You suffer from your environments. Yeah, no, most definitely. But let's also not forget that V8 just sounds so good in that car. And here's the reality: owning a performance car, it's part of the thrill of driving it, and it's also a status statement.
True.
Being able to pull up, you pull up at a stoplight and you've got a V8 rumbling behind the hood. The punk kid next to you with his daddy's car thinks a little bit about trying to race you. Maybe the ATS is a little bit more of a sleeper car. I don't know if you can call it a sleeper car with the awesome ground package and stuff that car comes with, but people look at it as maybe a little less desirable because it is a V6, where especially here in America, where it's always been big V8s. From the early days of NASCAR and bootlegging, it's always been big V8 power, and that's kind of what we've been born and bred on. Your drag racers, everything. Where Cadillac's taking it from more of the European approach, which nothing's wrong with that. They're excellent drag cars, and that's really what they're meant for. But doing things like straight line racing, which is what a lot of us grew up doing, V8's got to be the way to go.
And be honest, Camaro owners try selling them a V6 engine was a very difficult before the current generation, and so they still want to have the biggest engine available. I mean, Ford's able to sell V6 Mustangs right and left, but trying to get a Camaro owner to buy a V6 was a difficult task at best.
Right, and you bring up an interesting point with Ford and their V6 is the way that car is positioned in the marketplace. Ford only offers their V6 on their most introductory model. And then if you want something nicer that isn't the GT, you actually have to get their turbo 4-cylinder. Now, that turbo 4-cylinder for Camaro it's an interesting engine. I mean, if you haven't had a chance to drive one yet, they're actually a great drive.
Yep.
Because the argument's always been, where's the car that's most fun? It's at its edges. A 6.2 V8, there's not a lot of places legally on the roads to push that car to its limits. The 2-liter turbo, that car, it spools so nicely and it gets into its power range so quickly that you can push it to the ragged edge going to get groceries on Saturday morning. You know what I mean? So it's an interesting dynamic that we're having to discuss with our salespeople. and that the fact that all three cars are performance cars. The 4-cylinder isn't lacking anywhere in the suspension department. It still has the full setup suspension. Now, it doesn't have magnetic ride, but it does still have a full race suspension all the way across. And you brought up something earlier that there's a different ride and handling between the ATS Coupe and the ATS Sedan.
Mhm.
That's something we actually don't have a problem with Camaro going from Camaro Coupe to Camaro Convertible. We didn't lose any strength. We didn't lose any structuring. There's they added the bar underneath the strut brace underneath the hood, but it didn't necessarily need to be there. We didn't have to change any of our undercarriage at all. And for the customers who want the open top option, they don't have to sacrifice any of the performance with this generation.
That's one thing they have on us is
Had to bring up the convertible.
We don't have a convertible, and
Gotta bring up the convertible.
We know that's a question.
Thank you, Ian.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
You guys
You
keep up
have
the
the
convertible
right.
concepts.
You
I
have
don't know
the
why
right.
you don't keep.
Yeah. But
So-
you did mention one thing, and I didn't mean to interrupt. Sorry. The magnetic ride control. For ages at my dealerships, anyway, I've been calling that Cadillac secret weapon because BMW's not got it. Audi, not on those cars that compete with us. They don't have it, though they have it on the R8 and on some of the others. But that's a mid-engine supercar, so we're not in that category.
Not yet.
Yeah, we can only hope.
Well,
Yeah,
that is, but
right.
Uh,
Yeah, it's a front mid-engine, not a rear
Zero
mid-engine.
Six can go up and run an R8
there you
down.
Oh no, I know. I'm just
Yeah.
saying mid-engine.
Oh,
yes.
which-
Yeah.
Yes.
Not yet.
Project Zero.
Say that louder.
But the magnetic ride control affords us the ability with both of the Cadillacs, because we haven't even talked about the CTSV yet, but the ATSV with that magnetic ride control, and I think John would agree, and you can agree because you were there as well, on the V-Tour, we were able to just flat out handle the competition.
Oh yeah.
When we drove the M3s, they were nervous and skittish and twitchy.
Sure.
The ATS just sunk the tires into the pavement and went.
Yes.
And it didn't matter whether it was an S-bend or a hairpin or a decreasing radius turn. It just flat out performed the BMW.
Or the high bank corners on that M5.
Yeah. Oh, that was even worse.
Yeah.
I mean, that M5 was...
It didn't feel like a sports car.
No.
After
Once
getting
you,
out of the CTSV.
yeah, and on the banking, at 100, it was starting to get nervous. And the CTSV was like, is this all you got?
Mhm.
I mean, seriously, it was like,
It wanted
no
to
way,
go
Rocco, how fast do you want to go? I want to go faster. You can do that. You can do that with the CTSV. M5 was like, no, we are not going this fast. It's not good.
Well, since we got there, let's jump it up a notch. Let's go to CTSV and Corvette.
Yeah, let's talk some V8
There's
stuff.
a lot
More
of
V8.
heritage that is shared between those two cars from their development right now.
Mhm.
I mean, those two cars spent a lot of time growing up together on the Nürburgring.
Well,
I
it's
like the way you
funny,
put that.
So co-developed is what they want us to say. They don't want us to say. People hate it, especially when we deal with Cadillac clients, and you say, "Oh yeah, it's got the Z06 motor." No,
No.
don't say that. That engine was
it's
co-developed
shared
with
powertrain.
both applications in mind during
Yes.
its design.
Which is good.
But so obviously LT4. Are there differences between the LT4 in the Z06 and CTSV? And I straight up, I'm not 100% sure.
I don't believe there are.
Not
Other than
very-
maybe a slight exhaust difference.
And I thought there was a slight difference in the supercharger intercooler cores as well. I'd have to double check that, but I do know that rating, the Corvette does have 10 more horsepower and 20 more pounds-feet of torque than does the Cadillac.
and that could be
Right.
in
In
account
the
of
exhaust.
yeah.
and
and the
it could also
exhaust
be from the
area.
intake side too, because
Yeah.
the way the inverted radiators placed on the Corvette does offer a greater volume intake than possibly you get in the CTSV. We'd have to actually.
And we didn't get a list like we did on the previous generation. There was a
That's right. There was
distinct
a list
list
back in the
between
day.
Corvette and
Yeah.
V8
The
of what
old
differences were.
LS9 and
LSA and LS9. So
Yeah.
LS9 had a 2.3 liter
Right.
supercharger, and the LSA had a 1.9.
Yeah.
That's what it was. And now, I know at least on the CTSV, correct me if I'm wrong, Z06 running a 1.7 liter. I think that's the supercharger. That's
I know
what it
it's
is for CTSV.
I know it's smaller because one of the most amazing things about that engine development was the size difference between the LT1 platform and the LT4 platform. It got an inch taller. They put a supercharger on top of it, and the engine got an inch taller.
Yeah.
So it means we were able to keep it low in the car, keep the weight low in the car. That way it didn't sacrifice any handling from going to a supercharger. Because that was one of the issues with the past generation CR1.
Yeah.
Because the engine got taller, we had to raise the hood up on it. Visibility was affected because of that. And also, the weight was shifting a little bit higher, so we lost handling potential. I mean, driving the Z06 compared to the last gen ZR1 is a night and day difference. Now, of course, the suspension's so much better. We've got the latest gen mag ride on there.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a lot better computer systems as far as traction control and StabiliTrak and stuff go. But that last generation ZR1 was just it was an untamed animal trying to keep that thing in a straight line at from dead stop to punch.
Oh yeah.
The new Z06 in sport mode without even putting it in track mode, dead stop, gunning it straight out of there. It's just straight and it's true and it's just an absolute wonderful to drive.
As long as you leave everything turned on.
Right. Yeah. As soon as you turn everything off, all bets are off at that point.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we've all seen those videos.
Oh yeah.
We had some fun doing that during the just with the regular Stingray. Having guys drive the wet figure eights with them, and then having the pro drivers reach over and turn it off, and then just watching them spin out. Is really demonstrating to our sales guys how much driver's aid is there. Now,
we had the same experience with the CTSVs on the tour with the turn.
Oh yeah,
and
yeah.
the,
I remember.
Not true skid pad, but turn with the sand.
Yep.
And when you deactivate the system, yes, the car will bite you.
yes.
Yeah.
You need to know you better know what you're doing.
And the reality is that is something we, as trainers, need to reflect to our sales guys so they can turn around and reflect it to the customers. We're dealing with vehicles that are more powerful than anything we've ever had before. And the reality is the computers are so good, they're going to make you think you're such a better driver than you actually are.
Yes.
And as soon as that's gone and you're out there on your own hanging out, it gets scary quickly, and just not to scare customers with it, but just make them aware. The last thing we want somebody to do is drop 100, 130K on a Z06 and then go wrap it around a telephone pole. These cars are way too pretty to see them wrecked.
So that's a good point with the collaboration of all the systems on the car that help keep you safe and help boost performance. When Paul and I were out in Pahrump, that was something that Matt, what's his name? Matt. Oh, I'm trying to remember the marketing manager for ATS, CTS, and the V's.
Matt Stein.
No. Oh, I forget. I think
Couldn't tell you.
Anyway,
Sorry.
Cue edit to put this in with the correct name.
Yes.
Once we look at it.
Yes, exactly. No, I can't remember his name, but he was saying that that's something that BMW used to do quite a bit of. Was it's engineering the car, but it's taking the time to engineer or over-engineer the software that monitors all of that hardware. And the more time, the more money, the more effort you put into that, the better your product's going to be. Yeah. Not just from a driver standpoint, but also from a safety standpoint. Yes.
The only thing I worry about with that is one of the and take a step back to Camaro for a second. The last generation Camaro Z28 went up and competed against Godzilla in the GTR. And the biggest comment every competitive had between Z28 and GTR was the GTR felt too sterile. It felt like you were walking into a sterile operating room, and it just didn't have that fun factor to it. We don't want to lose that in our cars, but we also don't want them to be undrivable.
True.
Right. And on top of that, I mean, to bring in a totally different competitor, but I know from the Chevrolet side, and I hear it because we are in GM dealerships that sometimes also compete with Chrysler products. They're Hellcat.
Oh yeah.
With 707 horsepower. The first story I read about the Hellcat was the guy in Colorado who ran off the road and wrapped it around a tree because that car is an untamed SOB of a vehicle. And the Viper was no different.
Right.
No safety net.
Right.
And you have to strike that balance. Right. If the GTR is too sterile and the Hellcat is too untamed, right in the middle, look what's sitting there. Right. With either the CTSV or a Z06.
the Hellcat. It's funny you mentioned that. I looked at a Hellcat up close the other day. And something I thought was kind of cool. Have you ever noticed how one of the inside, you know how you have the 4 headlamps?
Yes.
Design. One of them on the, I think it's on the driver's side, is actually just the rim.
Yeah, it's an intake.
And it's an intake.
It's an intake.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's not. It's
it's very trick.
It's a functioning
It's
ring
very-
light,
very
but the
clever.
center's hollowed out, and it's actually part of the
Yeah.
intake.
Kind of like the flow tie on some
On the old Z28.
So
Yeah.
you open up the hood and you see the plumbing going from the back of where that headlight would be all
Yes.
the way to the supercharger. Here's what kills me about the Hellcat. Crazy amount of horsepower. 707 horsepower.
Right.
And it's got a 275 on the back. It's only running 275 section rear tires. That is ridiculous.
No wonder it can't take a corner.
No wonder it can't put the power down. That is too much power for too little an amount of rubber to harness it.
But no one calls it sterile, do they?
No.
That's true.
Well,
That's true.
Yeah, they call it sterile when you take a corner and it spins out into a field and you end up in a sterile hospital room from it.
Well, there could be that, I suppose.
Not promoting illegal street racing, but there's a great video on YouTube of a Corvette Z06 racing a Charger Hellcat. And it's in Memphis, and there's a slight turn in the road. And when that Hellcat hits the apex of that turn, it plows straight through the field and hits a telephone pole on the other side.
Oh my
yep.
goodness.
Share it with me, and we'll link it to the hub.
Okay.
Yikes.
Yeah,
Check it out on
it's a wonderful, wonderful video. Because we get that a lot, especially where I live in Louisiana. It's a bunch of good old boys, and it's a lot of drag racing. And guys come at me all the time. Well, why don't we have an answer to the Hellcat? Why don't we have the answer to the Hellcat? And really, we do, but it's not a street legal car. It's the Copo and the whole Copo program of having these purpose-built dragsters. And from a performance standpoint, I think it's wicked cool. You go to a parts department and order a drag car. A couple of my dealers actually have them, that they're personal race cars, and I think it's 3 engine options in there. You can get a 350, you can get a supercharged 350, or you can get a natural aspirated 7-liter. And the gearboxes and everything else that they put in these things are absolute monsters. You're talking about having a set of overlarge Hooker Super Slicks on the back, and it's just there. It's an incredible build. And it's an incredible program that Chevrolet's got. Giving these guys a real answer for a drag car that they don't have to go out and completely customize themselves.
And the rarest of all the Copos was the one-off Copo convertible.
Yes.
What? That's
yes.
a thing?
That's
it was sold
It's
at auction
not
for
a
charity.
thing. It's the thing.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I did see that.
It had
It's not a. It's the.
It had a structural roll cage around the passenger compartment that replaced the roof.
Nice.
But yes, it was actually
And-
something we built.
And that's to sort of tie back in with Cadillac. You don't have to. That's what, to me, one of the biggest and best things about the CTSV is. All of that power, all of that torque, all of that handling, and all of that luxury.
Right.
Because you sacrifice nothing.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things, too, that whenever I see a Z06, because I see lots of them at the dealerships where I train, because Cadillac, there's still many places that have Camaros, Corvettes, Chevrolet, and everything. And it's almost natural to see a Z06 on the showroom floor because they don't want them out in the bad weather in the Midwest and everything like that. And you look at those, and the interiors have really improved over the years. And that's one of the nicest things to see that, and again, I know I'm praising the Chevy from the Cadillac side, but it's deserved.
Yeah.
Because the luxury that they're putting into the Corvettes now, and the Z06 with a 3LZ or 3LZ package, if I'm saying it, or 3Z.
Yeah, 3LZ.
3LZ, yeah. With the ultra suede and the heated and vented seats and all the amazing stuff.
Those competition seats.
Oh, they're the bomb.
Yeah.
Not fat guy friendly though.
No.
Not fat guy friendly at all.
So be it.
Yeah.
But
That's why it's an option.
Right.
Yes.
That's why they're not standard.
Right.
But I mean, those Recaro seats, full carbon fiber seats. The entire frames are carbon fiber on them. That is
those things are beautiful.
talk about not sacrificing luxury for performance. From the Corvette standpoint, and for some aspects of the Camaro standpoint, I mean, it's still a Camaro and it's still 50, 60 grand. But you look at like your Hellcats that we were talking about earlier. Those things are absolute pigs. They weigh 4,000 pounds plus, and we're able to build these ultralight cars on these ultralight chassis and really not sacrifice any of the creature comforts, not sacrifice any of the luxuries, and still build a car that's a suitable race car. They drive it straight off the showroom floor, take it to your local track, and go have some fun with it.
Yes.
Well,
And that was one of the things that we didn't really focus on with the CTSV. We
Yes.
actually added quite a bit of weight, but all that weight was extra structure
Right.
Mhm.
that we built into the car,
Yes.
which, as we mentioned before, all that extra structure, all that extra stability allows you to become a better driver just because the car can handle more that you throw at it.
Yes.
But yeah, that's one thing we lost with CTSV versus the standard cars is we used to really brag about how light we were, but we're not the lightest in that performance segment at all. Matter of fact, that's also one of the things I think that really differentiates the Z06 and the CTSV is the Z06, although a quicker car, 0 to 60, is not the faster car
Right.
because it doesn't have the extra weight that the CTSV does, which helps keep it down
Right.
at those higher speeds.
Well, that's why also on the Z06 we have the Z07 and the Aero Performance packages
Yep.
to add in the
downforce.
downforce to compensate for the loss of weight.
Yes.
It's what I remember. If I remember right, the Z07 Aero 3 package, the top package, adds in 155 pounds of downforce to the front end at 150 miles an hour. It's somewhere around 150 pounds. But I mean, you think about it. That's your 16-year-old kid sitting on the hood while you're driving 150 miles an hour. I mean, it's a significant amount of weight strictly from downforce, strictly from aerodynamics, which is that's one of the big things they talked about with this generation Corvette. Is for a long time we were aerodynamics. How slippery can we make it? And we realized we got to a point where, through Corvette Race Team, that downforce is actually more important in being able to keep the good tire contact, be able to keep the power to the ground, and sacrifice a little bit of that aerodynamics to increase the downforce.
And we got a similar package on the CTSV, and there was a message that came out shortly after we launched it that if the front splitter was damaged and was removed from the car, do not drive the car at its top capacity because the aero is now screwed up on the car, so
Yes.
the front end starts to fly and the back end squatting down,
And that's bad.
and that's very bad.
Right, yeah, that's loss of steering.
Le Mans 1999. Anyone
Yes.
with the Mercedes Benzes that took off
the
and flipped,
CLR. I
that they
remember.
and they withdrew after two of them did that.
Yeah.
They were,
Unbelievable.
actually, that driver was on Top Gear. He was one of the stars in the reasonably priced car.
Really?
He's one of the F1 drivers that was the driver who was doing that. And he made a joke that, actually, if you look at it, I'm pretty sure you can see my brake lights on because I think I'm still in control at that point. I'm just hitting the brake.
So I've heard, because we were talking about differentiating CTSV and Z06, I've heard that the CTSV tends to be a little more reliable at the racetrack.
Yeah, Z06 has had some issues, especially with cooling. Recently, we've heard some issues on cooling and brake cooling on Stingray and Z06 because there's actually a separate brake fluid you're supposed to use for heavy track days,
Probably
which
supposed
is
to go up to
which
dot
is
4.
in the owner's manual,
Yeah, .4.
right?
Yeah.
Which is in the owner's manual,
Now who reads that?
right?
Yeah.
So.
So boil some brake fluid and your pedal goes to the floor.
There's another YouTube video that somebody shared on the hub.
Sebring.
Yeah, it's Sebring, where the guy ran through a fence because he just couldn't stop, and he just kept keeping it on the road and keeping it around until he finally coasted to a
Well,
stop.
that's also why we put the standard differential cooler on our V's for this generation.
Yes.
Because the previous generation, we were shelling rear ends left and
Mhm.
right. If
Yes.
you drove that car to its capacity on the
Yes.
track. Yeah.
Yes.
Very
And that was about the development from the previous gen of the V, the 556 horsepower when we coupe, sedan, and wagon. Moment of silence for the wagon, please. God, I love that car. But anyway,
I think it was the best looking of all three.
oh, no question.
And the fastest.
On the track, it
Yeah,
was.
Yeah.
and the fastest because it put better weight to the rear end.
But we found where the weaknesses were, and the engineers told us this when we did the tour, and they hit those with all the proper technologies, with the differential cooling, going even bigger with the brakes, the Brembos, which I still will call to this day forward the Cadillac of brakes, because that's what they are. They are the best brakes you can get out there, and they stop the car so well. And if I'm not mistaken, we also recommend if you go to the track to replace the brake fluid and make sure you have .4 in on the CTSV. That's the only change we recommend people make because of the higher boiling point, if I'm remembering how that works correctly.
I believe you're right, yeah.
But Just some amazing binders on that car. Wow.
On the Cadillac,
They're good.
speaking of Brembos, I know on Camaro and Corvette we actually have different brake packages that are available based on what the customer's performance level, what they want it to be.
Mhm.
Is that an option on the Cadillac? I'm just speaking from ignorance. I don't know.
You can get different color calipers,
Oh,
but the brakes are still
That's
the same.
adorable.
Yeah.
Oh, they're beautiful.
Yeah. You
Well,
can
we
get
actually-
red or yellow or gray.
We actually spent a lot of time with Brembo developing a new brake pad composite
Yeah.
that gives you the quieter performance of more standard street brakes, but the extra gripping force of a high performance brakes. It does still produce a little bit more dust,
Right.
but you don't get the
You
squealing
don't get the
noises
squealing
that you get on
noises, yes.
performance brakes until they get really hot,
Right.
because high performance brakes have a different temperature profile to them.
Do Z51 and when you go up to Z06, do you get slotted rotors? Because I know Z06 has the option for carbon ceramics, which are drilled.
Right.
But
Carbon ceramics are drilled.
I was thinking that they were cross drilled if you got
Cross-drilled.
Z51.
Was it
Rather-
cross-drilled?
Yeah, cross
Okay.
drilled and not slotted.
Is that what it
Right. I think he's
But
right.
just
Yeah.
because I noticed that when I look at them.
which is interesting because on the Cadillac side, we're taught to, train on why we have a traditional flat iron rotor and not doing the cross drilling or the slotting.
Yes.
Slotting tends to end up with premature brake wear and technically
Cracking in the brake rotor too.
Right.
you
Yeah.
get that with cross drilling.
With cross
too,
drilling
so,
also, yeah.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Big thick rotors with big vents inside too. I mean if you look straight down from vertical on top of a rotor, you can see those passageways are almost big enough to stick a finger in.
Yeah.
Because the rotor is so wide to hold the heat and then release it, and the passages to vent it are wide as well
And
to
that's
get rid
that's
of it.
kind of like
and
what we
it's
talked
beautiful.
about on the previous segment. We're talking about ATS versus Camaro, when the Camaro had the bigger engine versus a smaller engine.
Mm-hmm.
Smaller engine required more maintenance. Now we get to that brake package, and you get that high performance brake package, which requires more maintenance on the Corvette versus what the Cadillac has. So
Right.
it's a trade off on both directions out there.
Yeah.
Right.
Good point. So, just out of curiosity, do you know how you are supposed to monitor the life of carbon ceramic rotors? Do you know what you do?
Oh yes,
Yes.
we know.
Yep.
I
Yes.
Did you know
pray
that?
you never have to replace them because
Well-
they're wicked expensive.
Yes.
True.
That's
There's
true.
that. Yeah.
But yeah, they've got
Yeah.
a right on the rotor. They've got a stamped weight, and you weigh them.
You weigh
You
'em.
pull
Minimum
them off, you weigh them,
specification
and
of
when it
weight.
gets under
Yeah.
that weight,
It's
you're
time to replace them, and it's not just a front end brake job.
No,
it's
no.
an entire
Yeah.
new set of brakes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Pads, rotors, everything, and
What?
$10,000.
Well, the
$1,000?
Easily.
The BMWs were
The BMW, the replacement price was $14,000.
$10,000. Yes,
Jeez.
and we called 2 dealerships to get that information.
Yeah.
Jonesy took
And that's
that.
and that's after a $9,000 upgrade on
to
the
get
vehicle,
them in
Right.
the first
and then a
place.
$14,000 replacement when they need to be replaced.
So,
Wow.
so
Though they
on-
did last longer. We did give them props for the.
Oh, yeah.
They do last longer, but wow.
the Germans,
yeah.
but like
You will
on,
pay
Z,
now
on
and
Z06,
you will pay later.
Right.
Yeah.
the Z06, it's the carbon ceramics are part of the Z07 package,
Yeah.
which is a pretty hefty investment, but it really does set that car apart. But if I remember right, and it's been a while since I looked it up, but I think it's 13 to do the brake job on Z06.
I believe it.
Not to mention the 12 sets of tires you went through since then. Since we're on the topic of tires, Michelin, working hand in hand with Michelin on both Camaro and Corvette to develop a specific
and
tire.
CTSV and ATSV.
So
Yes.
Cadillac, that's what I was bringing up because
Yes.
Cadillac has that as well.
Pilot Super Sports.
The Pilot Super Sports,
Mhm.
yeah. I'll never forget the SEMA show from 2 years ago when they first introduced the pilots for Corvette, and they had the C7R backed up near vertical on a ramp, and it was the grip of the tires that was literally holding it in place. It wasn't actually bolted down.
Wow.
It
That'd be
was
cool.
yeah, it was Michelin's booth at
That's
SEMA,
wicked.
and I mean literally, it's probably sitting, I don't know, 50 degree down
degrees.
angle.
Wow.
And it's literally the grip of the tires that's holding it in place. You're able to look around it and stuff. There's no wires, there's no bolts holding it in place. It's just purely grip of the tires. And they actually, when they set up there, they actually backed it up in there. I don't know if that was SEMA or was North American International Auto Show. It was one or the other 2 years ago. That was their exhibit for those tires.
Pretty amazing.
You mentioned magnetic ride control. I want to talk about that for a second before we shut this down. But
Love
MRC. So obviously that's something that we share. Although I do know on the Camaro it's optional and it's only on the SS. Correct? Do you know what it costs?
I can look it up real quick.
It doesn't. I'm just curious. But anyway, we know on the Cadillacs it is standard.
Yes.
Right. Something I found out, and this was Paul Smith. Props to Paul on this one because you know how much of a tech geek he is.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah. Anyway, our Gen 3 magnetic ride control. When you go from Gen 2 to Gen 3, do you know what the big update was between 2 and 3?
40% additional stiffness on the top end and complete, uninterrupted, free flow adjustment throughout the entire range.
Okay.
And the maximum was raised by 40%.
Wasn't the maximum increased because they increased the fluid capacity in the shocks as well?
My understanding for Gen 3, the big upgrade, the big thing that made it a new generation was the inclusion of that second electromagnetic coil.
Right.
Okay.
All right, so we have 2 coils rather than the one
The same.
that we had for the second gen. Now, the reason why we did that, when you turn off an electromagnetic coil, it doesn't just immediately dissipate. It actually has a dissipation time period of about 20 milliseconds. So it's not as quick. The way you can get that dissipation time to go away, we have our electromagnetic coil that's wound in a certain direction. We add another one that's wound in the opposite direction so that when they both go off, that opposite wind somehow counteracts the dissipation time.
Well,
And,
same basic sound wave process we use with noise cancellation.
Yeah, no,
Exactly.
it's inverse amplitude
Yeah.
is what's canceling it out.
So we do that, and that allows us to turn it on, turn it off faster. Of course, you have the infinite variability between off and on. I say off and on. I mean engaged and fully engaged.
right.
So I found that out talking to Paul. I thought that was just a good tidbit. And then you look at competition. Who else has it?
Well,
Crickets.
So
Fascinating.
it's
Yeah,
pretty
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
To wrap it up, I want you to give me which car you'd have. Money's no object. Let's spec it out and tell me why. So who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Go for it.
Mine would be 2016 Z06, Z07 package, C7R Special Edition.
Nice.
So it was, I think they built 1,000 of them. One of my dealers had 3 of them because they're one of the top Corvette dealers in the country, and which is great honor. Came in yellow and black, special graphics package for it. Aero 3, every available performance option was standard. The only way you could order the car. I think they stickered right in 140 range.
What?
Yeah, they pushed it quite a bit, but from the pure Corvette experience, it's the pinnacle at this point until something else comes down. Harlan, shout out to you. Give us a little heads up on what's going on. You guys don't know, Harlan Charles is the brand manager for Corvette. Very cool dude.
I just know him by his hair.
Yeah, he does look a little bit like Jimmy Page, circa 1968.
True. All right.
Must be nice.
Who wants to go next?
Because of my insane predilection for manual transmissions, I will take an ATS-V sedan, despite the additional weight. The suspension can take care of it. I can get my family in it, and definitely carbon package on that, which, $5,000 if I remember correctly. Get the big spoiler and the big downforce, and I could care less about a sunroof because that adds about 50 pounds of weight to the roof. Wrong place to add your weight if you're going to drive it like that. And I would get it in Vector Blue.
Oh, nice color.
With the Recaros.
Okay.
And all the other fun stuff. I think we're talking probably around $78,000 for that.
That sounds about right.
And I'll smile for the rest of the time I own the car.
Nice.
And for me, it would be the CTSV, simply because I'm 6'2", over 200 pounds,
Bingo.
and wedging myself into an ATS day in and day out, not a fun thing that I would want to do. And CTSV for me is a vehicle that I can drive every day.
Absolutely.
I'm all about keeping my car in the garage. I have a 2-car garage and not a whole lot of excess space where I live, and having a Corvette would be a third vehicle. That would not be a vehicle. The Z07, not a vehicle I'd want to drive every day. And so having that CTSV as a daily driver and be able to get that performance out of when I needed it, I think that would be my choice.
Yeah.
Not a loser in the bunch.
Definitely not a daily driver car. Actually, if I had to go pick a GM Performance daily driver, it would be the SS sedan because it's the ultimate road trip car.
Something we haven't talked about. Well, I mean, we're not going to talk much about it because it's not staying around for too much longer.
Right. So Holden Commodore.
17's the last year for it, right?
17.
Or the factory shuts down in 17.
I believe. I mean, this has kind of all been vague and up in the air, and we don't.
But from the Cadillac side, what a great car that is.
Oh yeah.
The SS.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Such a sleeper. Such underrated.
Did you see the press on Motor Trend? Motor Trend's Jason Camisa compares it to the old E39 M5 and absolutely loves it. If you haven't seen that video, check it out. Anyway, my car. I would have a CTSV as well, and mine would have the carbon black package. So that's something new that we just come out with, and so that's going to have the black chrome finish grille. It's going to have black wheels. It comes with the carbon fiber package, and I would have Recaro's as well. So there you go.
So it could be none more black.
Yeah,
it would be none more black.
Everything's all black.
Yes.
Exactly.
Black on black on black on black on black.
Exactly. So
triple black, as we used to say in the biz.
The thing is, I don't know the pricing on that.
Now, one thing I got to give Cadillac props for when it first came out, the frost package for the V's, flat white.
Oh yeah.
I have a couple of joint Chevy Cadillac stores, and seeing that thing on the showroom was just breathtaking the first time it came out.
And if they couldn't paint mine blue, the red. Because I've seen that Velocity Red on the ATSV is flat out hot.
Now,
oh wow!
Talk about great new colors for 17 for Corvette. We're bringing out. I think it's called Black Rose or something like that.
Ooh, it sounds interesting.
Remember the cherry color they did on Silverados a few years ago? The black cherry. It was like an almost super dark purple metallic. That's coming out for Vet, and it looks fantastic.
I bet
we did a black cherry like that on STS a number of years ago.
Same color. Yeah. That car. I mean, it's a little bit darker with a little bit heavier metallic count in it for this new black rose color. I think is what it's called. And my lord, that is a fantastic looking car.
Speaking of colors, 1LE, the 1LE press color on that V6.
The Venom Green?
Yes.
Okay.
With the flat black hood, the flat mirrors, and the spoiler. Oh my God.
Now, is Venom Green like the dear departed Dragon Green that was on the Sonic?
Yeah, actually, I think it may be a shade brighter than that, but it's in that same vein.
So, with that, any final thoughts? I mean, what we kind of picked our favorite cars, and I think we were all going to stay true to our brands, but...
I think we can all agree that GM Performance is in a good position. Our race history is second to none. We'll let Ferrari keep their F1 wins, but we'll take everything else. And
kudos to Corvette, just won first place at VIR this past weekend.
So nice. Good job for Corvette race team. We do great when the Porsches don't punt us in the final lap. So
true, very true.
But I think we can all agree that we're all in a great position here. Whatever option our customers decide to go with, whether it be the Cadillacs or the Chevrolets, they're not going to be disappointed. They're going to have a car that's going to bring them a lot of happy memories.
Well, that's it for this episode. Thanks again to John, Brian, and Ian for recording this with me. If you have any suggestions for topics for future episodes, please share them with me. And if you have any feedback regarding this particular episode, please reach out to me via email, or you can share your feedback on the Facebook Trainer Hub. Thanks for listening.